Hey everybody, I'm Anna McEwen. And now for Bob Switzer with the Epic Narrative.
Always a pleasure to have you here on the Epic Narrative. Oh man, I should have had a drink of water before I started. Here we go. There we go. All right. Maybe I'll make it through. Maybe. Had a little bit of a change in the weather. You know how sometimes it gets a little cooler and then it gets hot and then it gets a little cooler again. Yeah, typical March weather, but yeah, it's like this little bit of a, I don't know, going on in the back of my throat. So sorry if it's a little rough for you guys out there. So we're in episode 8. We're in Joshua chapter 5, verse 1. Now, when all the Amorite kings west of the Jordan and all the Canaanite kings along the coast heard how the Lord had dried up the Jordan before the Israelites until they had crossed over, their hearts melted in fear, and they no longer had the courage to face the Israelites. Well, that's a shock. Now, I know it's kind of a holdover from chapter 4, but it's a good way to start this week's episode because, again, we are changing the paradigm through which Joshua is seen. And I think it's good to note these sort of verses over and over and over again because they've been sitting there for thousands of years. So this basically verse 1 is there is no nation that has an army that wants to go to war with the Hebrews. Nobody with an army wants to go battle the Hebrews. They're like, nope, your God is freakishly big and powerful. And we ain't dumb. We don't like to die. We like to intimidate. We like to, negotiate. We like to be diplomats. Occasionally we go to battle when we're really mad. We don't do it that often. We like to bring huge armies into valleys, but ideally we like to do small skirmishes until somebody finally gives way or an agreement can be made, or we do one-on-one battles and, theoretically we all become slaves of the other side. But really what it means is we all pay tribute to the other side for, whatever, 10 or 15 years until we decide to do battle again. Like this is not, they were like, no, this is not a good negotiation thing. We are not doing battle against you. Your God is on a whole nother level, which is true. And that's significant. It's what God wanted to do with the supernatural. He wanted to draw people away from their current paradigm and into one in which he exists, and they can have a conversation with him. But you see, Joshua and his nation are planning a military strategy. So there's no opposing army. What does that mean? Well, probably a couple things. It could be a perfect setup for cultural influence, for conversation, for relationship, building, for treaties, for contracts, for religious teachings. Like there's so many ways that this could go. Or it could be the perfect setup for wiping out all the people who are alive here in the promised land and taking over their cities and claiming them as our own in the name of God. It could be. What makes the difference? Well, this is how this is what happens. How we see God is how we see this going down. Our opinion of God, our view of God is what starts to filter the words of God. Now, it's in so many ways we've said it, in different ways along the way, but here we see it again, clear and plain. There is no opposing army. There is no king that has an army that wants to put it together to go after or to take on the Hebrews. So what kind of perfect setup is this? Is this, does your God look like Jesus? And I know you can say, well, they didn't know who Jesus was. They did. God described himself fine. Does your God look like Jesus, or does he look like Zeus or Apollo or Ra or Baal? Baal, depending on how you want to say it. A lot of archaeologists, don't quote believe in Jesus because they read these kind of accounts and they say your God is no different than Zeus or Apollo or Ra or Baal. Like this is just typical God building that occurs in every tribal society, and it's the study of humanity. It's not hermeneutics, Bob. What do I want to say? Anthropology. Anyways, I've read I've read a lot of books, but I can't remember the name of that. Anyways, they look at it and they say, "See, you're just like everyone else." The very thing that God wanted Moses, Abraham, Isaac, Joseph, Moses, Joshua, he wanted them all to portray him as different from all the other gods. There will be no other God before me. In other words, I am completely different from all the other gods. No one's as great as I am. No one's as loving as I am. No one's as relational as I am. No one's as approachable as I am. No other God wants to be as interactive with their people as I am. There will be no other gods before me. I know a lot of times it just gets hammered into us like, if you spend more time on television than you do reading the Bible, then you have another God before you. Get right with Jesus. It's so much bigger than that. And this was the setup. Is it the setup for ultimate world domination and control, or a setup for conversation and influence over the next hundreds of years, drawing all nations into God's kingdom? Now, they viewed God, and their preconceived idea of how God wanted to work was made through how they saw him, and they saw this as a perfect military setup for perfect military victories. They were like, hey, nobody wants to oppose us. You have any idea how easy it is to win battles like that? We can march up to the city walls. We can demand entry. We can go in and wipe them all out. We can take the plunder. And we can move on. This is why Jesus is so important to you and I. Because he cleared up the misconceptions of how people saw God, both then and now. We are to recapture God's heart versus how he's been translated and how those words have been applied for years. That's what we're supposed to do. We're supposed to look at Jesus and say, wow, our view of God has been skewed. It's been skewed by translators and applicators, preachers and revelators, prophets and kings, because they needed a God who would allow them to be dominating, allow them to be angry, allow them to be judgmental, allow them to bring curses on others. A few weeks ago, at least at the time of this recording, there was a national Christian television person who literally read out a voodoo curse on people who were opposing them. And they were like, God directed me to use this, to use this prayer. Unquestioned, unaccountable leadership. That's what that looked like. But here they are cursing those around them because in their mind, that's what God allows. That's the way God behaves. God curses those who he wants to curse, and he kills those he wants to kill. And if I'm a representative of God, then I can do the same thing. Man, it'll rock your world when you really start to evaluate. I know season 1, I did a bonus episode, and it's one of my favorite passages to go after, but it's Jesus in the temple. I think I actually did a short TikTok on it as well because it's pretty fascinating to me. But if you see Jesus, I should say if you see him, you can watch Jesus's life and you're like, all right, if I'm supposed to be like Jesus, if I'm supposed to ask myself, what would Jesus do? WWJD. If I'm supposed to do that, then I can't, there's nowhere where he gets angry. There's nowhere where he gets, violent. There's nowhere where he, throws punches and whatever, except for these 2 verses in Matthew. I could, you know what? That's where it is. See, God does get violent. Jesus got violent, right? And I go into the whole thing because bottom line is the words used there are neutral. The word tossed or flipped, neutral. The only thing that changes the nuances of those words is how you want to present. And there's nothing in the life of Christ that indicates that he ever got angry. Also, immediately after, it says he sat and he taught for hours. And I'm telling you, if he had just got done whipping people, beating people, flipping tables, throwing money into the streets so the poor could be provided, sustenance, if this was all about social justice, he would not have had a crowd of people ready to listen to his teachings. And I'm going to stop there. Bob's like, are we getting into it? No, we're not. We're going to move on. Verse 2, at the time the Lord said to Joshua, make flint knives and circumcise the Israelites again. So Joshua made the first flint knives and circumcised the Israelites at Gibeah Harahaloth. Now, this is why he did so. All those who came up out of Egypt, all the men of the military age, died in the wilderness and on the way after leaving Egypt. All the people that came out that had been circumcised, but all the people that were born in the wilderness during the journey from Egypt had not. The Israelites had moved about wilderness for 40 years until all the men of the military age were dead. For the Lord had sworn to them that they would not see the land until he had solemnly promised that their ancestors to give us of the land flowing with milk and honey. So he raised up their sons and gave them their place. And these are the ones that Joshua circumcised. They were still uncircumcised because they had not been circumcised. I love it when, we make things very clear. After the whole nation had been circumcised, they remained where they were in camp until they were healed, we'll get into that. And then the Lord said to Joshua, today I've rolled away the reproach of Egypt from you. So the place is called Gilgal to this day. On the evening of the 14th day of the month, while encamped at Gilgal on the plains of Jericho, Israelites celebrated the Passover. At the day of the Passover, that very day, they ate some of the produce of the land, unleavened bread and roasted grain. And the manna stopped the day after they ate this food from the land, for there were no longer any manna for the Israelites. But that year, they ate the produce of Canaan. So, circumcision for all the men. Now, this was not, this was because they had no worry of attack. Out in the wilderness, they felt, exposed, susceptible to attack. And when you circumcise, if you don't do it as an infant, it can be painful and take several days to recover from. So nobody wanted to attack them. We just covered that. There was no king that was going to take them on. Plus, they were surrounded by 40,000 military-ready people. Now, remember, circumcision is not unique to the Hebrews. Many nations practice it, Egypt being one of the major ones. All the men lined up in place to get ready. Now, I don't know what that looks like. I really don't. They made flint stones. Evidently, flint can get to a very fine edge. It's a little brittle, but it can also be very sharp. So I don't know if they stood. I don't know if they, if they sit down. I don't know if they kneeled, and placed something on a cutting board. I don't know if they did it themselves, like they passed the knife around. Uh, I, I don't know. Is there one? Is this the the poor doctor has to do this? Like, this is my job today. It's a lot of people, and again, I see a lot of time involved in this. This is not, hey, we'll get this done in a few hours. Everybody go home and recover. It's probably like many of the other things that we've seen in these books. It probably came down to, all right, you're going to break off into groups of 1,000, who are going to break off into groups of hundreds, who are going to break off into groups of 50, and you're going to break off into groups of 10. One of the 10 will be the knife wielder, and then one of the 50 will take care of the 10 knife wheel holders, and one of the hundreds will take care of the 50 knife holders. Like, they worked it all out so that everybody was taken care of and everybody got done. But again, I'm sure it took time. And when you're all done, like I said, some it's very similar to other male surgeries. Some people, it takes 3 days. They're swollen. They're in pain. Other people, it seems like 3 hours later, they're like, yeah, I'm good. I don't know why people worry about this. Like, it just seems really easy. But either way, it had to be a crazy day or two or whatever, filled with lots of conversation. And I'm sure their wives were like, why are they whining so much? We go through worse in childbirth. And they're not lying. They do. They do. They don't. The thing. No, it is. Yep. But when you're observing from the outside, right, this looks like a massive religious fever going on. Circumcision was often tied to religious activity, commitment, and it was a way to be obviously marked for life. You couldn't erase this tattoo. You weren't going to get captured in battle and then pretend to be from another nation. You were going to be noted. Nations were noted. Those nations that practiced circumcision were noted. So they were going to be marked. And they were doing this as a recommitment to the covenant that God had given the previous generations, and that the previous generations had agreed to. So in all the activities that are going on, this is going on, and I'm sure Jericho is watching, and they're passing information on. They're doing recon themselves. They're passing, they're like, hey, things are getting, kind of crazy down here. They're all getting circumcised. They're all like, they would have recognized this as an activity that heightens their commitment to their God and to their plan. And it's quite clear that their plan is military. And the Canaanites and Amalekites are going, we're not going to go after them. No, like, their God is way too big. So they waited, verse 8, they waited until all of them are done, which would have been several days of healing. And when all were healed, in verse 9, they were told God did not hold the rebellion of the last generation against them. In other words, this was something that many wondered. Many of those that had been born in the wilderness and grew up with families around them that were losing moms and dads and grandparents because they had, quote, rebelled against God, right? They had this mindset that God might come after them as well because they're related by blood. And they were like, but what if I would have rebelled? What if God knows everything and sees everything, and he now looks at me and says, you would have been just like your father. You would have been just like your parents. You don't deserve to live either. This was something they wondered. So God makes it clear. All right, listen, you all are circumcised. Quote, blood has been spilled. So I understand you are committed, and I'm committed to you. I don't hold their rebellion against you, which is an interesting thing about sin, right? God does not hold the sin of one against another. Now, the results of sin may impact another. That part we've dealt with a lot, throughout the years, but he does not hold the sin of one against another. So he gives them this sense of freedom that they could actually enjoy the promised land and not wonder, not sit back and begin to be curious. Like, is God going to take this away from us? If we screw this up, will he just kill all of us as well? So there was a lot of comfort, I think, in the conversation from Joshua and from the Lord to the people. And there was a lot of recognition that would allow them to enjoy the promised land. And then it says the whole thing, let's see, about the day after Passover. So on the 14th day of the month, while camped at Gilgal in the plains of Jericho, the Israelites celebrated Passover. So this, if you remember, Passover is celebrated based on specific numbers of days and weeks from another celebration. So it's basically the way it was laid out was never miss this one. Always make sure it's on this date. So the date comes. Everybody's been circumcised. Passover is now upon us. Everybody sits down for a meal. They remember the journey from Egypt, out of Egypt, but they're also celebrating the fact that they will not be held accountable for their parents' rebellion. And the next day they go out and they start to eat things from the land. And this is significant. It marks for them a move from trusting God for their daily bread to let's eat from the abundance of the land. Now, I don't know if they paid for it. I don't know. I mean, part of me thinks you get this like little picture of them like, oh, it's like this little campground, and you wander out down here in Florida, like we're at this campground, there's a big old mango tree outside, and you're not supposed to take them, right? The neighbor has made it clear. Well, that's because you got 300 guests, they'd eat them all. He wouldn't get any. So I get it. So I don't know if you got 1 million people going out to grab some grain from the stocks, like that's a lot of people. That's a lot of you're not, your crops are gone. So I don't know where this food came from. They could have bought it. I mean, I don't know. There were enough merchants around, I'm sure. Just something to think about. But regardless, they started to eat from the land. And so the next day, the manna stopped. Now, that had to look a little weird. You're used to getting up in the morning, having your morning honey bread. And even though at times you might have been tired of it, it was always something there for you. You get up and it's not there. Well, they didn't necessarily go to bed prepared for the fact that they needed to create breakfast in the morning. So I don't know. But I'm guessing they got up and they were like, oh, no manna. All right. Well, I guess we're starting to eat from the land. I guess this is the land that will provide for us. Now, from all those that are in the land, and I know I've hit on this before, but I'm going to hit it again because I think it's an important shift in the way that we view Joshua. Can you understand how Joshua looks like a dictator? He leads them across a raging river. They all obey. He sends 12 in to build, to pick up stones and build a memorial. They all obey. He tells all the men to get circumcised. They all obey. They have, a Passover feast. They all do the same thing. All the people look like zealots. They look like people who are fully committed to their God and whatever Joshua tells them this God says. No one questions the leaders. No one questions the priests. The priests teach the people, and the people receive it and agree to it. Sacrifices are done by everyone. Everyone's bringing sacrifices in. It's not just occasionally, it's not just a few of them that want to get right with whatever God it is that they worship. It's everybody's bringing sacrifices, little ones, big ones. And the fully, like the idea of being fully committed, like I don't know if you can visualize this, but picture observing them, like your job. Let's say you got, you're working for the king of Jericho, and he's like, I want you to observe everything they do. And you're looking for an anomaly. You're looking for a group of people that kind of go off and do their own thing. You're looking for a group of people who are like, yeah, we're going to go move down here. Like they're all working together. There was a religious celebration. Everybody celebrated it. There was nobody out doing their own party, tailgating down by the river. Everybody celebrated Passover. When it was time for circumcision, nobody stepped aside. Everybody lined up. Everybody committed. There was, you go back and report that to a king. He's looking for a way to negotiate. He's looking for somebody who he might be able to convince that he's not there to try and do battle, that he's just trying to have a conversation, that he can work out some sort of peace deal for food and shelter, and he could even give them plots of land or whatever. Like, he's looking for an inroad, and he's not getting any because everyone is so committed. And Joshua is their unquestioned leader because Joshua speaks with God and God speaks with Joshua, and we don't question it. Now, I've said before, they all could have spoken with God. All they needed was an invitation, but they refused because in their mind, the way they saw God was unapproachable. God was dangerous. God was scary. God was powerful. And God wanted them to kill everyone. So that's what they were preparing to do. They didn't want to get to know the people in Jericho. They didn't want to negotiate. They wanted to wipe them out. And that's how we head into, in essence, the fall of Jericho. And we're just going to call it there. I know this is a pretty short one, but obviously, if I start going into the fall of Jericho, we're going to make this a really long one. And I have learned over the years, people prefer a short one over a long one. Yeah, when it comes to podcasts. That is true. So we're going to call it a day. I hope you guys had a good one. I hope you have things to think about and ways to refilter this story as we head into the fall of Jericho. I think some of you already can be like, you're going to put it together and be like, wow, that puts a whole new twist on what happened in that city. And it's true, it does. And we'll go into it next week on the Epic Narrative.
Don't go anywhere. We've got Bob Thoughts.
And welcome to my thoughts for this episode. I don't know. I realized today, I was like, man, it is 8 episodes in. We haven't even taken Jericho yet. That's pretty crazy. But you guys are crazy enough to be on this epic journey, and we are on it together. So hallelujah. What a ride. I'll just share a little thing that came up because it came up right the beginning of this episode where it talks about having no other gods before me. And we get used to saying that in Christianese. He is God Almighty. He is over all other gods. He is, et cetera, et cetera. But the reality of what we're saying, I think, gets lost. And what we're saying is there are other gods, not just the devil, not just demons running around pretending to be whatever. There are other gods, and God created them. And these are my thoughts. I know. And I do think it's probably dangerous to say without a ton of backup, but I think that it's clear in the creation account that other realms were also part of the universe. Other beings are in the universe. Angelic, spiritual beings are all around. They all have assignments. And when the Bible talks about God sitting in over our council of gods, same word, right? Elohim, sitting in the council of the Elohims, overseeing or judging the council of the Elohims. The implication is that there are other gods in this universe, and they are subject to the Almighty God, the Lord of Lords, the one who is above all. And I truly believe God is, and Yahweh is the God. But I obviously wanted to share my thoughts on that, because sometimes we repeat stuff because it's just there in the Bible, and we just kind of say it, and we miss the facts of what we're saying, because we're saying something pretty profound. But we skip over it because it's kind of uncomfortable for churches to talk about that. It's kind of uncomfortable for a pastor to bring that up, or your public speaker to bring that up from the pulpit. I say because I know a lot of guys behind the pulpit. They aren't really pastors, and we've talked about that before too. But it's uncomfortable because people be like, "Wait, what? Wait a minute, did he just say there's other gods?" Yeah, but God says there's other gods, and that's okay. It does not change his authority or power in the universe, and we fully embrace the Almighty, all-powerful God here at the Epic Narrative. I did want to give a shout out to my friend Iggy. I know he listens, and he didn't ask me to do it, but I met him at the Rethinking God with Tacos conference, and he's awesome, and I just want to say hi to him. So when he gets around to listening to this episode, Iggy, what's up? Give me a shout out back. As always, you all can feel free to email me and connect. I had some really good questions coming in since the beginning of the season. I really appreciate that. We are still trying to raise that money. I'd love to get either regular gifts coming in that would get us to our goal or past our goal by the end of the year. That would be awesome. If you can help us out, that'd be so great. I am in conversations with various promotional people around the country who are willing to work with us, but obviously they want to get paid, and they should get paid. So for that, I'm grateful for their willingness, but could use your help in making that connection complete and getting a little larger audience, which would allow us to find a sponsor, which would allow this to continue to be propelled. Because I believe in this podcast. I believe that God has been good and always been good. And he has been much maligned and misrepresented by so many others. Not maliciously, I just don't think they know him like we do. And he loves them and we love them, and he's still good and all that stuff. This is not a competition or us against them or anything like that. It's just something I'm passionate about and would love to see increase. So if you can help us out, feel free again to reach out, and we will
Hey everyone, thanks for listening. If you like what you heard, you can subscribe to this podcast
love
on
you guys.
any platform
Appreciate you listening.
use.
I'll see you next week.
You can also reach out
on
to Bob
the
for questions or booking
Narrative.
at thebobswitzer.com or email him at thebobswitzer@gmail.com. See you next week, guys.